The steady beep of the heart monitor was the last sound I heard before the anesthesia pulled me under. At 73 years old, I'd survived 2 heart attacks, but this arrhythmia was different. Dr. Chen, my cardiologist, had been clear that without the pacemaker replacement surgery, I wouldn't see Christmas. My old device, implanted 8 years ago, was failing, and my heart couldn't maintain a steady rhythm on its own anymore. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Count backward from 10, Mr. Davidson, the anesthesiologist said, adjusting the mask over my face. 10, 9, 8. My last conscious thought was relief that my daughter-in-law, Rebecca, had offered to handle everything while I was in surgery. She'd insisted on taking care of my apartment, my medications, even my cat Muffin. After my son David died in that car accident 2 years ago, Rebecca had stepped up to help his old man navigate the world alone. I woke up 6 hours later in the cardiac recovery unit, groggy but grateful to be alive. The new pacemaker was already working. I could feel the difference in my chest, steady and strong like a metronome keeping perfect time. Dr. Chen appeared beside my bed, but instead of the post-surgical smile I expected, her face was etched with concern. "Mr. Davidson, we need to talk," she said, pulling up a chair. "There's been a complication, but not with the surgery. When we tried to register your new pacemaker, with the manufacturer's database, we discovered something troubling. Your old pacemaker, the one we removed, it's showing up as reported stolen." My mind was still foggy from the anesthesia, but I managed to croak out a response. "Stolen? How can that be?" It was in my chest. Dr. Chen pulled out her tablet, showing me a screen filled with medical device serial numbers. "According to Medtronic's records, someone reported your old pacemaker as stolen property 3 days ago. They filed a police report claiming it was taken without permission. The strange part is, the person who reported it stolen listed themselves as Rebecca Davidson, claiming to be your daughter." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Rebecca wasn't my daughter, she was my daughter-in-law, David's widow, and she certainly hadn't stolen my pacemaker since it had been inside my body until this morning. "Doctor Chen, there's been some mistake. Rebecca is my son's widow, not my daughter, and she's been helping me prepare for this surgery." "That's what I was afraid of," Dr. Chen said grimly. "Mr. Davidson, I've been a cardiac surgeon for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Someone has been calling our office, Medtronic, and apparently several other medical facilities claiming that your pacemaker was stolen. They've provided detailed information about the device, including the serial number, which they shouldn't have access to unless..." She trailed off, but I was starting to understand. The only way Rebecca could have that information was if she'd seen my medical records, which I'd foolishly given her access to when she offered to help coordinate my care. "Unless they had access to my medical files," I finished. "Exactly. But here's where it gets really concerning. About 2 hours ago, someone matching Rebecca Davidson's description tried to sell a pacemaker at Metro Medical Supply on Ashford Avenue. The owner, thinking it was stolen medical equipment, called the police. When officers arrived, the woman was gone, but she'd left behind documentation showing your name and medical information. My phone, lying on the bedside table, buzzed with a text message. Still weak from surgery, I gestured for Dr. Chen to hand it to me. The message was from Rebecca, sent just 30 minutes earlier. "Harold, the medical supply store offered more than expected for your old device. Don't worry about the money, I'm putting it toward David's memorial fund. You'll never miss it anyway since you got the new one." Attached was a photo that made my blood run cold. It was my old pacemaker, the one that had just been removed from my chest, sitting on what looked like a pawn shop counter with a price tag of $800. "Dr. Chen," I whispered, my voice barely audible, "she's trying to sell my old pacemaker. But how did she even get it?" Dr. Chen's expression grew darker. "Mr. Davidson, this is highly irregular, but I need to ask you directly. Did you give Rebecca Davidson permission to take possession of your explanted medical device?" "Of course not," I said, the reality of the situation hitting me like a freight train. "I didn't even know patients could take their old devices home. I assumed you disposed of them as medical waste." "Typically we do, But patients have the right to keep explanted devices if they request them for sentimental reasons. Someone called our surgery coordinator yesterday, claiming to be your daughter Rebecca, saying you wanted to keep the pacemaker as a memento since it had kept you alive for 8 years. They provided your birth date, social security number, and insurance information to verify the request. The betrayal cut deeper than the surgical incision in my chest. Rebecca had used my trust, my medical information, and my grief over losing David to orchestrate this theft. But the worst part was realizing that while I was unconscious, fighting for my life on the operating table, she was already planning to profit from the device that had kept me alive. There's more, Dr. Chen continued. The surgical coordinator mentioned that the woman seemed very knowledgeable about the resale value of pacemakers. She asked specific questions about the battery life remaining, and whether the device had any recalls that might affect its market value. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, Mr. Davidson. This was planned. My hands shook as I tried to process what Rebecca had done. After David's death, she'd been so supportive, helping with groceries, driving me to appointments, even staying overnight when I had chest pains. I'd trusted her completely, even adding her as an emergency contact on all my medical forms. Now I realized she'd been gathering information, waiting for the right opportunity. What do we do now? I asked, feeling older and more vulnerable than I had in years. Dr. Chen stood up, her jaw set with determination. Now we call the police. What Rebecca has done isn't just theft, it's medical fraud and identity theft. She's impersonated a family member to obtain medical devices, and she's potentially put other patients at risk by introducing stolen medical equipment into the resale market. This is serious, Mr. Davidson, and we're going to make sure she faces the full consequences of her actions. Within an hour, Detective Sarah Walsh was taking my statement from my hospital bed. She was a seasoned investigator with the medical fraud unit, and her expression grew grimmer with each detail I provided. Dr. Chen had already given her Rebecca's contact information and copies of the fraudulent medical requests. Mr. Davidson, I'm going to be direct with you, Detective Walsh said, closing her notepad. What your daughter-in-law has done goes far beyond simple theft. She's committed medical identity fraud, which is a federal offense. But I'm concerned this might not be her first time. My heart monitor beeped faster. What do you mean? We've had 3 similar cases in the past 6 months, all involving someone claiming to be a family member requesting explanted medical devices from cardiac surgeries. In each case, the person provided detailed medical information and seemed unusually knowledgeable about the resale market for these devices. Detective Walsh pulled out her phone and showed me a surveillance photo from Metro Medical Supply. The image was grainy, but I could clearly see Rebecca standing at the counter, my pacemaker in her hands as she negotiated with the store owner. What struck me wasn't just the theft, but the casual way she was handling the device that had literally kept me alive for 8 years. The owner of Metro Medical Supply, Marcus Thompson, has been cooperating with our investigation, Detective Walsh continued. He's actually the one who tipped us off to this pattern. When Rebecca came in today, it triggered his suspicions because she knew too much about the device specifications and market pricing. Most people don't realize that used pacemakers have significant resale value for international markets, where new devices are prohibitively expensive. The detective's phone rang, and she answered it immediately. Walsh here. She listened intently, her eyebrows rising. Are you certain? When did this happen? After hanging up, she turned back to me with a troubled expression. Mr. Davidson, we just executed a search warrant on Rebecca's apartment. What we found is disturbing. She had a detailed filing system with medical records for at least 12 different patients, all cardiac surgery recipients from the past 2 years. Your file was just one of many. My blood ran cold. 12 patients? How did she get access to all those records? That's what we're trying to figure out. But there's more. We found correspondence with several international medical device brokers, price lists for various cardiac devices, and what appears to be a business plan for trafficking in explanted medical equipment. Rebecca hasn't just been stealing your pacemaker, she's been running a sophisticated medical fraud operation. Dr. Chen, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. Detective Walsh, I think I know how she's been accessing patient information. Rebecca Davidson has been volunteering at the Cardiac Rehabilitation Center for the past 18 months. Volunteers have limited access to patient schedules and basic medical information to help coordinate activities. That would explain how she knew about upcoming surgeries and could time her requests, Detective Walsh replied. We'll need to audit all patient records she had contact with. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Rebecca herself. Detective Walsh gestured for me to answer while she activated a recording device. Harold, are you okay? Rebecca's voice sounded strained. I heard there was some confusion about your old pacemaker. The police came to my apartment asking questions. Rebecca, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, why did you take my pacemaker without asking? There was a long pause. Harold, you're being dramatic. It's not like you needed it anymore. The hospital was just going to throw it away. I thought we could get some money for David's memorial fund. You know how expensive that headstone is going to be. Rebecca, that device kept me alive for 8 years. You committed fraud to get it. Fraud? Her voice turned sharp. Harold, you're overwrought from the surgery. I've been taking care of you since David died, making sure you eat, driving you to appointments, cleaning your apartment. The least you could do is not begrudge me trying to honor my husband's memory. Detective Walsh was frantically taking notes, but she gestured for me to keep Rebecca talking. How did you know my pacemaker would be worth money? I asked. Another pause. I did some research online. There are websites that explain these things. Harold, you're acting like I committed some terrible crime. It's just a piece of medical equipment you don't need anymore. Rebecca, the police found files on other patients at your apartment. This isn't just about my pacemaker, is it? The line went silent for several seconds. When Rebecca spoke again, her voice was completely different, cold and calculating. Harold, you don't understand the medical device industry. These companies charge thousands of dollars for equipment that costs pennies to manufacture. There are people in developing countries who die every day because they can't afford pacemakers that Americans throw away without a second thought. I was providing a service, connecting discarded devices with people who needed them. By committing fraud and stealing from patients? I asked. By being practical, she snapped. Do you have any idea how much money I've saved lives with? I've sent over 40 devices to clinics in Guatemala and Honduras. Patients there pay a fraction of what Americans pay, and doctors can implant perfectly functional devices that would otherwise sit in medical waste incinerators. Detective Walsh was writing furiously, but she looked up and mouthed, "Keep going." How long have you been doing this, Rebecca? Since about 6 months after David died. I was drowning in grief and medical bills from his accident. Then I started volunteering at the cardiac center and learned about the waste in the medical system. It started small, just helping one patient whose family couldn't afford a new device. But then I realized the scope of the need and the opportunity. So you've been stealing from patients while they were unconscious in surgery? I wasn't stealing, Harold. I was redistributing resources more efficiently. And I only took devices from patients who were getting upgrades anyway. No one was harmed. Detective Walsh held up a note that read, "Ask about the money." Rebecca, if you were just helping people, why were you trying to sell my pacemaker for $800? The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally, she said, "The memorial fund is more expensive than I expected. I thought you'd understand given how much you loved David." I did love David, I said, my voice breaking. But that doesn't give you the right to steal from me while I was fighting for my life on an operating table. Harold, you're being self-righteous. You've got your new pacemaker, your insurance covered everything, and you're going to be fine. Meanwhile, I'm trying to honor your son's memory and help people who actually need these devices. But instead of gratitude, you're treating me like a criminal. Detective Walsh made a cutting motion across her throat, signaling me to end the call. Rebecca, I think we need to talk in person, I said. Fine. I'll come to the hospital tonight after visiting hours. We can work this out like family. After she hung up, Detective Walsh smiled grimly. Mr. Davidson, Rebecca just confessed to running a medical device trafficking operation. We now have probable cause to expand our investigation and coordinate with federal authorities. This case just became much bigger than one stolen pacemaker. Rebecca never made it to the hospital that evening. Federal agents arrested her at her apartment at 7:30 p.m., just as she was preparing to leave. The timing wasn't coincidental. During our recorded phone conversation, she'd essentially confessed to operating an international medical device trafficking ring, giving investigators everything they needed for federal charges. Detective Walsh visited me the next morning with an update that left me stunned. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The FBI's Medical Fraud Task Force had been tracking illegal medical device exports for months, following a trail that led back to several cardiac rehabilitation centers across 3 states. Rebecca's operation was more sophisticated than anyone had initially realized. Mr. Davidson, your daughter-in-law wasn't just stealing pacemakers, Detective Walsh explained. She was running a network that included corrupt hospital staff, international shipping coordinators, and offshore medical brokers. We found evidence of over 200 stolen medical devices being sold overseas in the past 18 months. The financial scope was staggering. Rebecca had generated nearly $500,000 in illegal profits, money she'd hidden in accounts under David's name and social security number. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me that she'd been using my deceased son's identity to launder money from stealing medical devices from grieving families like mine. Dr. Chen entered my room just as Detective Walsh was showing me photos of the evidence seized from Rebecca's apartment. Seeing the organized files, shipping manifests, and detailed patient profiles made my stomach turn. Each folder represented someone like me, a vulnerable patient whose trust had been violated during their most frightening moments. Harold, there's something else you need to know, Dr. Chen said gently. We've identified 11 other patients from our hospital alone, whose devices were stolen through Rebecca's volunteer access. The youngest victim was 28 years old, a new mother who had emergency cardiac surgery after childbirth complications. Rebecca took her pacemaker while the woman was recovering from both heart surgery and a C-section. That detail broke something inside me. It was one thing to steal from an elderly man like me, but targeting a young mother fighting for her life was beyond comprehension. I thought about David, how proud he'd been when he married Rebecca, how he'd believed she was the kindest person he'd ever met. He would have been horrified to learn what she'd become after his death. The trial began 4 months later. By then, the investigation had expanded internationally, with authorities in Honduras and Guatemala cooperating to trace the stolen devices. What they discovered painted Rebecca not as a humanitarian helping poor patients, but as a calculating criminal who had exploited both American victims and desperate foreign buyers. Marcus Thompson, the owner of Metro Medical Supply, testified about Rebecca's extensive knowledge of device pricing and international markets. His security footage showed her negotiating with the cold efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. When prosecutors played the recording of our phone conversation, Rebecca's own words condemned her. She claimed she was saving lives in developing countries, the federal prosecutor argued during closing statements, but evidence shows she was charging these vulnerable patients nearly as much as they would pay for new devices. She wasn't a humanitarian. She was a predator who exploited tragedy on both ends of her operation. The defense tried to portray Rebecca as a grieving widow who'd lost her way after David's death, but the prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showed her lavish spending on designer clothes, expensive vacations, and luxury goods, all funded by stealing medical devices from unconscious patients. Rebecca was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to all victims. The judge's words during sentencing echoed what I'd felt since this nightmare began. Mrs. Davidson, you violated the most sacred trust in medicine, the vulnerability of patients in their darkest hours. Your crimes represent a profound betrayal not just of individual victims, but of the medical system itself. The broader investigation led to reforms in hospital volunteer programs and medical device disposal protocols. The Cardiac Rehabilitation Center, where Rebecca had volunteered, implemented new security measures and background checks. Dr. Chen spearheaded an initiative to create secure disposal procedures for explanted devices, ensuring that patients' medical equipment couldn't be stolen and sold. As for the money Rebecca had hidden in David's accounts, the courts ordered it returned to victims and donated to legitimate cardiac patient assistance programs. The memorial fund she'd claimed to be supporting turned out to be another lie. There was no expensive headstone, no memorial plans. She'd simply been using David's memory to justify her crimes. 6 months after Rebecca's sentencing, I received an unexpected phone call from Dr. Maria Santos, a cardiologist in Tegucigalpa, Honduras. Through an interpreter, she explained that several of the devices Rebecca had trafficked had indeed reached her clinic, but not as the humanitarian gesture Rebecca had claimed. "Mr. Davidson, I want you to know that we had no idea these devices were stolen," Dr. Santos said. "We were paying nearly market price for what we thought were legally obtained surplus devices. When we learned the truth, we immediately cooperated with authorities and stopped all purchases from these sources." The call was bittersweet. While it was painful to know my pacemaker had been part of Rebecca's criminal network, Dr. Santos assured me that the device had ultimately saved a life. A 60-year-old teacher named Carlos had received it, and he was doing well. She offered to put us in touch, but I declined. That pacemaker belonged to a different chapter of my life now. Today, 2 years after the surgery that changed everything, I carry a new pacemaker that works perfectly. My heart beats steady and strong, no longer dependent on the device that Rebecca tried to profit from. I've become an advocate for medical device security, working with hospitals to educate patients about their rights regarding explanted equipment. The most unexpected outcome came when Marcus Thompson, the pawn shop owner who first alerted authorities, became a friend. His quick thinking and ethical standards had prevented Rebecca from selling my pacemaker and potentially helped crack the entire trafficking ring. We meet for coffee monthly, and he often jokes that my case was the most expensive $800 transaction he never completed. I still miss David every day, but I've found peace knowing that his widow's crimes don't diminish his memory or the love we shared. If anything, the contrast between David's genuine kindness and Rebecca's calculated cruelty has helped me appreciate the truly good people in my life more deeply. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Dr. Chen hadn't been so thorough in checking the device registration, or if Marcus hadn't been suspicious of Rebecca's knowledge about pacemaker pricing. The thought that she might have continued stealing from vulnerable patients is chilling. But justice prevailed, and that matters. Every heartbeat my new pacemaker provides is a reminder that standing up to those who exploit our most vulnerable moments isn't just about seeking justice for ourselves. It's about protecting everyone who might become their next victim. Rebecca is scheduled for release in 4 years. I hope prison has given her time to reflect on the harm she caused and the trust she betrayed. As for me, I'm focusing on the future, grateful for every steady heartbeat, and determined to use whatever time I have left to make sure no other patient suffers what I did while fighting for their life. 3 months after Rebecca's sentencing, I received a letter that changed my perspective on the entire ordeal. It came from Linda Morrison, a 45-year-old teacher from Phoenix, whose defibrillator had been stolen by Rebecca's network, while Linda was recovering from emergency cardiac surgery. Her handwriting was shaky, but her words were powerful. "Mr. Davidson, I want to thank you for having the courage to press charges," she wrote. "When I first learned that my device had been stolen, I felt violated in a way I couldn't describe. But watching your case unfold in the news gave me strength to come forward with my own story. Because of your bravery, Rebecca can't hurt anyone else." Linda's letter prompted me to reach out to other victims identified during the investigation. What I discovered was a community of people who had been carrying shame and confusion about what had happened to them. Many had initially blamed themselves, wondering if they had somehow given permission they couldn't remember due to medication or trauma. Eleanor Vasquez, a 78-year-old grandmother from Tucson, broke down crying during our first phone call. "Harold, I thought I was losing my mind," she said. "When the hospital told me someone had taken my old pacemaker, I convinced myself I must have agreed to it during one of those fuzzy moments after surgery. I felt so stupid. These conversations led me to propose something unprecedented to Dr. Chen and the hospital administration. I wanted to organize a support group for medical device theft victims, the first of its kind in the country. The hospital's legal team was initially hesitant, worried about liability. But Dr. Chen championed the idea. Our first meeting drew 12 people, ranging in age from 26 to 82. Each person had a different story, but the common thread was the profound sense of violation they felt. 26-year-old Ashley Chen had her insulin pump stolen after diabetic ketoacidosis nearly killed her. 82-year-old Robert Martinez lost his hearing aid processor while recovering from a stroke that left him temporarily unable to communicate. The support group meetings became a catalyst for something larger. We started documenting patterns in medical device theft that law enforcement had missed. Ashley's technical background in software engineering helped us create a database tracking not just Rebecca's crimes, but similar cases across the country. What we uncovered was disturbing. Medical device theft was far more common than anyone realized, but it rarely made headlines because victims often didn't even know they'd been robbed until months later. Many hospitals had informal policies of disposing of explanted devices quickly to avoid exactly the kind of theft Rebecca had perpetrated. Our research caught the attention of Senator Patricia Woolridge, who chairs the Senate Subcommittee on Healthcare Fraud. She invited our group to testify at hearings on medical device security. Standing before those senators, sharing my story alongside Linda, Eleanor, and Ashley, felt like the most important thing I'd done since my son David died. The hearings resulted in the Medical Device Security Act, legislation requiring hospitals to implement strict protocols for handling explanted medical equipment. The law also established a national database for tracking medical device theft, making it much harder for criminals like Rebecca to operate across state lines. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome came from an unexpected source. Dr. Santos, the cardiologist in Honduras who had unknowingly purchased stolen devices, contacted me about establishing a legitimate medical device donation program. Working with international medical charities, we created a legal pathway for patients to donate their explanted devices to clinics in developing countries. The program, which we named David's Bridge in honor of my son, has now facilitated the donation of over 300 medical devices to clinics in Central America and Southeast Asia. Each donation is carefully documented, with full consent from the patient and verification that the device is medically sound for reuse. Marcus Thompson, my friend from Metro Medical Supply, became an unexpected partner in this effort. His expertise in medical device valuation helped us ensure that donated equipment was properly tested and certified before being shipped overseas. He jokes that Rebecca's failed attempt to sell my pacemaker launched the most rewarding business venture of his career. The personal healing that came from turning our trauma into something positive surprised everyone, especially me. Eleanor, who had initially blamed herself for being victimized, became our most effective advocate, speaking at medical conferences about the emotional impact of device theft on elderly patients. Ashley developed a smartphone app that allows patients to track their medical devices and receive alerts about recalls or security issues. Her app now has over 50,000 users and has been adopted by several major hospital systems. As for Linda, the teacher whose letter started this advocacy journey, she returned to her classroom with a new passion for teaching students about medical ethics and patient rights. Her high school curriculum on healthcare fraud prevention has been adopted by schools across Arizona. The ripple effects continue to spread. Dr. Chen was promoted to head of cardiac surgery and has made our hospital a national model for patient advocacy and medical device security. She often tells medical students that the most important lesson from Rebecca's case isn't about crime prevention, but about listening to patients and taking their concerns seriously. Last month, I received word that Rebecca had been placed in solitary confinement after attempting to recruit other inmates into a new medical fraud scheme. Even behind bars, she was trying to exploit vulnerable people for profit. The news reinforced my conviction that pressing charges had been the right decision, regardless of family loyalty or David's memory. My new pacemaker continues to work flawlessly, each heartbeat a reminder of how far we've all come since that terrifying day when I discovered Rebecca's betrayal. The device that replaced the one she tried to sell has now witnessed the birth of advocacy organization, the passage of federal legislation, and the creation of legitimate pathways for helping patients worldwide. Sometimes people ask if I regret trusting Rebecca so completely before her crimes came to light. The answer is no. Trust is still worth the risk. But now I understand the difference between earned trust and blind faith. Rebecca had earned my trust through her actions after David's death, but she had violated that trust so thoroughly that it could never be restored. The support group still meets monthly, though our focus has shifted from processing trauma to preventing future crimes. We've become a resource for law enforcement, medical professionals, and other victims who need guidance navigating the complex aftermath of medical device theft. Every meeting reminds me that Rebecca's greatest failure wasn't just stealing from vulnerable patients. It was underestimating our capacity to transform pain into purpose, to turn individual victimization into collective action that protects countless others from experiencing what we endured. 5 years have passed since that frightening day when Dr. Chen first told me about Rebecca's crimes. And the world looks remarkably different now. The Medical Device Security Act has been implemented in hospitals across all 50 states, creating standardized protocols that have prevented thousands of thefts. Every time I read about a hospital successfully thwarting an attempted device theft, I feel a quiet satisfaction knowing our advocacy contributed to that protection. The personal transformations have been equally remarkable. Ashley Chen, the young software engineer whose insulin pump was stolen, recently launched her own medical technology company focused on device security. Her innovations in encrypted medical device tracking have attracted venture capital funding and partnerships with major manufacturers. When she invited me to the ribbon cutting for her new headquarters, I was struck by how she'd channeled her trauma into groundbreaking solutions that will protect millions of patients. Eleanor Vasquez, the grandmother who initially blamed herself for her device theft, has become something of a celebrity in patient advocacy circles. Her testimony before Congress was so compelling that she's now regularly invited to speak at medical conferences worldwide. At 78, she travels more than most people half her age, spreading awareness about medical fraud and patient rights. Her granddaughter tells me that Eleanor's advocacy work has given her a sense of purpose she never had before retirement. Linda Morrison, the teacher whose letter first inspired me to reach out to other victims, recently received the National Education Association's Award for Innovative Curriculum Development. Her medical ethics program has been implemented in over 200 high schools, educating thousands of teenagers about patient rights and healthcare fraud. She often emails me stories about students who've gone on to pursue careers in medical ethics or patient advocacy, inspired by learning about our case. The David's Bridge program has evolved beyond anything I initially envisioned. What started as a simple idea to legally donate explanted medical devices has become an international nonprofit organization with chapters in 12 countries. We've now facilitated the donation of over 1,500 medical devices, from pacemakers to insulin pumps to hearing aids, all properly certified and legally transferred to clinics serving underserved populations. Dr. Maria Santos, the cardiologist in Honduras who initially contacted me about the stolen devices that reached her clinic, has become one of our closest international partners. She now serves on David's Bridge board of directors and helps us identify legitimate medical facilities that can benefit from device donations. The irony isn't lost on me that Rebecca's criminal network inadvertently introduced us to one of the most ethical and dedicated physicians I've ever encountered. Marcus Thompson's life has taken an equally unexpected turn. What began as his ethical decision to report suspicious activity at his pawn shop has evolved into a second career as a medical device security consultant. Major hospital systems now hire him to train staff on identifying potentially stolen medical equipment. His expertise in pricing and authentication has made him an invaluable resource for law enforcement agencies investigating medical fraud cases. The support group that started with 12 people in a hospital conference room has grown into a national organization with over 300 members. We've established local chapters in major cities, and our annual conference draws patient advocates, medical professionals, and law enforcement personnel from around the world. The relationships forged through shared trauma have created a network of support that extends far beyond our original purpose. Dr. Chen's career trajectory has been remarkable to witness. Her promotion to head of cardiac surgery was just the beginning. She's now recognized as a national expert on medical device security and patient advocacy. Medical schools across the country use case studies based on our experience to teach future doctors about the importance of patient trust and institutional responsibility. She often tells me that Rebecca's case fundamentally changed how she practices medicine, making her more vigilant about protecting vulnerable patients. The legal ramifications continue to unfold. Rebecca's case established important precedents in federal court regarding medical device theft and identity fraud. Her 8-year sentence has become a benchmark that prosecutors cite in similar cases, ensuring that other criminals face serious consequences for exploiting patients. The restitution payments she's required to make have funded victim support services and medical device security research. Perhaps most significantly, Rebecca's crimes exposed weaknesses in the medical system that went far beyond individual theft. The investigation revealed inadequate background checks for hospital volunteers, poor documentation of explanted device disposal, and insufficient patient education about their rights regarding medical equipment. Addressing these systemic issues has made healthcare safer for everyone. The personal healing that came from this advocacy work surprised me most of all. When Rebecca first betrayed my trust, I felt ashamed and violated in ways I struggled to articulate. Connecting with other victims and working to prevent similar crimes gave me a sense of agency I hadn't expected. Instead of remaining a victim of Rebecca's cruelty, I became part of a movement that transformed individual suffering into collective protection. My relationship with grief over David's death has also evolved through this process. Initially, discovering Rebecca's crimes while using David's memory to justify them felt like a second loss, a contamination of the love I had for my son. But watching the positive changes that emerged from our advocacy work has helped me separate David's legacy from his widow's betrayal. The David's Bridge program ensures that his name is associated with genuine compassion and ethical medical practice, not the exploitation Rebecca committed in his memory. The financial recovery exceeded anyone's expectations. The assets Rebecca had hidden using David's identity were not only returned to victims, but generated additional funds through investment growth during the legal proceedings. These recovered funds established an endowment for medical device security research and victim support services, ensuring that resources will be available for future cases. International cooperation in addressing medical device fraud has strengthened significantly since our case gained attention. The protocols we helped develop for legitimate device donation have been adopted by medical organizations worldwide, creating legal alternatives to the black market exploitation that Rebecca and others had operated. This systematic approach has reduced both the supply and demand for illegally obtained medical devices. The technological innovations inspired by our advocacy continue to emerge. Ashley's encrypted tracking system has evolved into comprehensive patient safety software that monitors everything from device recalls to medication interactions. Her company recently announced partnerships with major electronic health record providers, meaning millions of patients will benefit from security measures that originated from our support group's brainstorming sessions. Educational institutions have embraced the lessons from Rebecca's case in ways I never anticipated. Medical schools now include specific training on recognizing signs of medical fraud and protecting vulnerable patients. Nursing programs teach students about the psychological impact of medical device theft on patients. Even business schools use our case study to discuss ethics in healthcare commerce and the importance of supply chain integrity. The legal profession has also taken notice. Law schools now offer specialized courses in medical fraud prosecution, and several attorneys have built practices focused specifically on representing victims of medical device theft. The precedents established by Rebecca's case have empowered prosecutors to pursue more aggressive charges against criminals who exploit patients, leading to increased conviction rates and longer sentences. As I approach my 78th birthday, my new pacemaker continues to function perfectly, a constant reminder of how much has changed since that terrifying day when I discovered Rebecca's betrayal. Each steady heartbeat represents not just my personal survival, but the thousands of patients who are now better protected because we refuse to let her crimes go unpunished. Rebecca herself remains incarcerated, though reports from the correctional facility suggest she continues to show little genuine remorse for her actions. Her attempts to manipulate other inmates and staff have resulted in extended solitary confinement and denial of early release opportunities. Sometimes I wonder if she truly understands the magnitude of harm she caused. But I've learned that her acknowledgement isn't necessary for our healing or for the positive changes that emerged from our advocacy. The legacy of this experience extends far beyond medical device security. Our advocacy work has inspired patient rights organizations, influenced federal healthcare policy, and demonstrated the power of victims to transform trauma into meaningful social change. The support network we created continues to expand, offering resources and guidance to new victims while working to prevent future crimes. Most importantly, the trust that Rebecca violated has been rebuilt through the relationships formed in our advocacy community. Working alongside other victims, medical professionals, and law enforcement personnel has restored my faith in human decency and collective action. The betrayal that initially left me feeling isolated and vulnerable ultimately connected me to a network of remarkable people committed to protecting others from similar harm. Looking ahead, the work continues. New forms of medical fraud emerge regularly, and our vigilance remains essential. But the foundation we've built, the relationships we've forged, and the systemic changes we've achieved provide a solid base for addressing whatever challenges arise. Rebecca's attempt to profit from my vulnerability ultimately strengthened protections for countless patients she never could have imagined. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.